everyone, and welcome again to The Girl with the Shovel. Today we are going to talk about how to water your houseplants. I wanted to start by answering one of the most frequent questions I get asked, which is, how do I tell when to water my houseplant? Okay, now the easiest way to tell when to water your houseplant is when it's dry. When it's dry, you need a water. But it can be hard to tell when is it actually dry versus when is it just dry on top of the soil, but it really has water down below, because this will happen a lot actually. So there's 3 different ways you can tell if your plant's soil is dry. First, you can feel the soil. So put your finger in the soil, feel around, dig down deep, and see, okay, is it dry all the way through or is it just dry on top? Because if it's just dry on top, which is normal because the water will sink down into the bottom of your pot, and if it's moist down in the bottom, then your plant might not need water. The second way to tell is by feeling the weight of your soil. When you lift up your plant, if it's really light, then it shows that your soil is dry. But if it still has water in it, it will kind of weigh down your pot a little bit more. So you can tell by how light or how heavy it is, which will show how much water is in that soil. And then the last way is to buy a soil moisture meter. Now these go for pretty cheap and they are a lifesaver. You simply stick it in the soil and it will tell you exactly how wet or how dry your soil is. And then you can see if you need to add more water or not. Next, people ask me how often they should water their houseplant. And for this, it is very difficult to answer this question because it depends. Okay, it depends on how much perlite you have in your soil or sand in your soil. It depends on how much, maybe you have a lot of coconut coir or organic matter that holds on to moisture, or maybe you have more bark. So the soil type will affect how frequently you have to water. It also depends on how much your plant is growing. If your plant is actively growing, like in the spring or the summer, then you're going to need to water more frequently, especially with the hotter temperatures, the longer days. Water's going to evaporate out of the pot faster, whereas in the wintertime, when temperatures are lower, days are shorter, you don't get as much light, and your plant will sometimes even go into dormancy, then you don't need to water it as frequently. If you water it just as much as you did in the summer, you'll actually be overwatering your plant in the winter. So you need to always make sure that you check for moisture in the soil before you add more water, because it will depend. So I can't really say water every 5 days or water every 12 days. It really depends. What I can say though is if you have a moisture meter or if you're just feeling the soil and your soil stays really moist, I would start thinking about drying out the soil, changing it out, because then you're gonna have root rot problems. That is the biggest thing with watering, is if you overwater, if your soil stays too wet for too long, that's when you get the bacterial issues, and that's when you get your root rot problems and your overwatering and killing your plant. Next, I wanted to talk about watering thoroughly. So what do people mean when they say water thoroughly or water your plant evenly? Okay, that just means that they want you to put water all the way around the plant and make sure that it doesn't just get the top couple of inches. They want water all the way through the soil. So that's all they mean when they say water evenly, is just make sure that you get water all the way around to have moisture throughout the entire pot and not just the top or not just one side. Which brings us to, what is the best way to water? This is more of a question, do I water from the top or do I water from the bottom? Because some people swear by bottom watering, whereas most beginner plant people just water from the top because that's what you're supposed to do, right? That's what you do outside. You just put water on the top. So there's actually not a whole ton of difference between top watering and bottom watering. The biggest factor in if you should water from the top or the bottom, I think a lot is you. You get to choose which way is easier for you and what setup you have with your pots that will make it easiest for you to water. For my first method of watering is if you have your pot in another pot. Like you have a nursery pot that isn't very cute into another pot that usually doesn't have drainage holes, and that's kind of your designer pot, something that looks a bit nicer. Technically, this system has no drainage. So you have to water and allow for that drainage in a different way. Two different ways: you can either water from the top or you can bottom water. You can water from the top and just get the water all the way around, let it drain into that other pot. So any extra water that just flew out from the sides, then it really gets a chance to soak that up. The biggest thing though is don't leave it in this water. If after about 10-15 minutes, if there's still a bunch of water sitting in the bottom of the pot, then you want to make sure that you empty it. So pull it out, drain it, just dump out that extra water, and then you'll be good. Some people also like to take the nursery pot out and then put it in a tray or a bucket and soak it from the bottom. This is also good. Leave it in the water for about 10-15 minutes again. Let it soak up as much water as it wants, and then let it kind of drip. And then once the extra water kind of finishes dripping out, then you can put it back into the designer pot. Next, if your pot is in a little tray, so it has drainage out the bottom of the pot, but it has a little tray to catch the water. Some of these trays are actually nice because you can bottom water your plant from the trays, but other times you'll want to do top down if the tray is kind of shallow. So all you do here is you just make sure that once again you water evenly, you water around, and then any extra water will drip onto the tray. You just want to make sure you don't water too much. But then sometimes I've noticed if I do this, it still doesn't have enough water just because that tray is shallow. I don't want to risk, getting water everywhere. And so then I'll maybe come back a bit later and water it a second time just to make sure that it's watered thoroughly and that it's soaked up as much as it wants. And then any extra water that is left over after that, then I'll empty that water. Now, pots with no drainage are really tricky. I actually do not recommend pots with no drainage because a lot of times people either overwater or underwater these plants. But one easy way that you can do it is you water from the top, and then any extra water after about 2 minutes or so, you can kind of tilt your plant and drain off any extra water. But this does get a bit messy, and it's very difficult if you have a larger plant in a pot with no drainage. It just is a mess. So I definitely recommend having pots with drainage. And if you like the pot that doesn't have drainage, then use the pot and pot method. Get a nursery pot. Put your plant in the nursery pot with drainage, and then put that in your designer pot so you can remove it if you need to water it thoroughly. Another thing is if your plant gets too dry. Sometimes these plants just need a good soak. A good way to do this is to put it either in a sink or a bathtub, depending on how big your plant is, and just water it. Water it all the way through, water it all the way around, and then let it all drain out, and then come back in another 20 minutes or so and water it again. And sometimes you can even plug up the water or put it in a bowl or something with water and let it kind of bottom feed. And plants really love this. They love the opportunity to get as much water as they possibly want. as long as it has enough drainage that the extra water can get out. That's the only thing that can go wrong with this, is if you don't let the extra water drain. But as long as you've got good drainage, plants will love you if you occasionally bring them over for a good soak. So that's it for my watering tips and how to water your houseplants. If you have any more questions or comments, definitely leave them below. And I love reading them. I love responding to all of your questions. And if you have even more questions or plant-specific questions, go head on over to the Facebook group, Houseplants for Plant Killers. And if you like this video, go ahead and hit the thumbs up and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. So you have to make sure that you remember to always check your soil for water before you water it. I know, check your soil for water before you water it.